Okay. Our next speaker is Michael Tritsch from Yale University, and his paper is titled A Domestic Horizon, Household Niches and Ancestor Worship. Welcome, Michael.
Great, thank you. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see my PowerPoint? Awesome, thank you. All right, thank you and good afternoon. I'd first like to thank Arcee for organizing this virtual conference and allowing me the opportunity to present my research involving an investigation into the function of niche emplacements in domestic contexts. While a small quantity of niches appear at a range of different sites, they occur in significant numbers at the New Kingdom settlements of Amarna and Deir el-Medina, typically located in the central or main reception room of the house. These niches are full-length wall recesses, 1 or 2 bricks in depth, and there are both single niche constructions as well as double niche constructions. As this reconstruction shows, full-length niches have a defined threshold and are framed by 2 jambs here and here, and a lintel surmounted by a cavetto cornice with tourist roll. Where pigment is preserved, the niches appear to be painted solid red and often include some yellow embellishments, with this central vertical band of yellow being very common. In addition, a small square painted with anthropomorphic figures of gods and people appears centered along the top of the rear panel. And over here, you can see a niche jam from the Moot precinct, which shows the red coloration. Niches have been said to serve both an architectural and cultic function. The architectural purpose has only been applied to Amarna and derives from both Petrie's and Burkhart's original observations that niches are often located directly across from doorways, providing balance to the layout of the room. Petrie, together with Pete and Woolley, also proffered a cultic interpretation based on the niche's decoration, which is how they were understood at Deir el-Medina by Briere, where they seldom appear across from doorways. However, with the exception of a brief article by Laura Weiss, niches from these 2 sites have not been analyzed together, which led me to reevaluate the evidence. While the early interpretation of niches at Amarna linked them to providing architectural balance to opposing doorways, as we can see in this main reception room, with this niche right here balancing the doorway directly across from it, and similarly with this niche also balancing the doorway across from it. Anna Stevens later expanded this idea of balance to include the balancing of doorways on the same wall or balancing other niches. So here, this niche also balances the doorway on the same wall, and this double niche balances the double niche directly across from it. This idea of balance is also supported by the fact that niche decoration often mimics a doorway, creating an overall sense of harmony within the room. Yet, the decoration of niches at Amarna has also been used to infer a cultic purpose. It mainly includes depictions of the royal family, images portraying the worship of the Aten, and illustrations of people seated before offering tables. Additionally, niches display Hetet Dinesut or Yao and Ek prayer inscriptions addressed to the Aten and the Ka of the house owner. Yet, circling back, this cultic argument is complicated by the fact that doorways and houses and tombs also display similar images and inscriptions as we see on these door frames. Here, a cornice that surmounted a doorway, we have a scene of the house owner worshipping the Aten's cartouches, which is identical to reported images on niches. And here, the inscription on the door frame closely parallels the inscriptions on niches in Ramos's house. This therefore raises the question as to whether the niche decoration has a ritualistic meaning or is simply a copy of the doorway to enhance balance. However, cultic material associated with niches at Amarna lends support for their ritualistic function. It is likely that stelae, statues, or busts would have been displayed in the recessed alcove, such as this royal family stela. Well, when I inspected the stela, at the Neues Museum, I noticed remnants of gypsum plaster on its back and red pigment on its side, as we see here. This could indicate its inclusion in a niche. Additional support for niches being used for cultic activity comes from the appearance of painted friezes on adjoining walls and the placement of material in front of niches, such as a vase or altar, like the altar shown here. Moving to Deir el-Medina, we again find the niches in the main reception room, although they rarely appear across from a doorway, as we see with these niches having no relation to doorways, although the niches do provide balance to each other. So this niche balances both the niche directly across from it and the one on the same wall. Because of this, they have always been interpreted exclusively as cultic, based on their decoration, which, like Amarna, includes inscriptions commonly dedicated to deities and private or royal ancestors, and depictions of individuals in a worshipping pose. Also like Amarna, material found in front of niches at Deir el-Medina supports a ritualistic function, such as amphorae and platforms, which likely served as offering slabs. Further, common finds in the same context as niches are linked to cultic activity, such as the Akh stele and anthropoid busts shown here, as well as libation basins and offering tables. Finally, red and yellow coloration of niches at both Amarna and Deir el-Medina is another indication of their cultic function. Red and yellow both have clear solar meanings, which are complementary, associated with the glow of the sun at its rising and setting, being symbolic counterparts. So, while the cultic function of niches seems evident, the architectural influence cannot be discounted, making it difficult to separate these two views. As a result, I am approaching the study of niche emplacements from both an Etic and Emic perspective to gain a more holistic understanding of these features. The Etic perspective relates to the outsider view, based on what can be learned through the study of materiality, the archaeological remains, while the Emic perspective refers to the insider view, gleaned directly from the written record, a philological approach, allowing the scholar to simultaneously see and hear past societies. Therefore, by integrating these two approaches in my investigation, a more comprehensive interpretation can be developed as to the use and function of niches in the household setting. I began by reevaluating all of the architectural data that exists on niches. From the published photographs and drawings, I developed a typological categorization of niche emplacements at Amarna and Deir el-Medina. I then reanalyzed all the niches, investigating the distribution of niche types between these two settlements, and their placement in the house as it relates to cardinal direction, features located directly across from the niche, and then the expanded definition of architectural balance. And going back to the niche examples, there are three basic types: the single niche with projecting jambs, the single niche with recessed jambs, and the double niche with recessed side jambs and a projecting center jamb. In terms of distribution, the single projecting niche is only attested at Deir el-Medina, while the double niche only occurs at Amarna. The single recessed niche appears at both sites. Looking at niche location in relation to cardinal direction, no clear pattern emerged at either site, which could support a more architectural function. In terms of what appears opposite niches, the majority of those at Amarna are across from a doorway, indicated in orange, as compared to a very small number of similarly positioned niches at Deir el-Medina, which is in line with original observations. Yet, a significant number of niches at Amarna don't fit this pattern, being opposite a blank wall, indicated in blue. However, when the concept of balance is expanded, 90% of niches at Amarna and 60% of niches at Deir el-Medina do provide some sort of architectural balance, either to doorways in orange or other niches in green. The difference in number between these two sites is likely related to the fact that they are completely different types of settlements. In Amarna, a capital city, there is more available space, and more freedom in the design of house layout, with less state control. Because of this, balance was probably an aesthetic consideration in choosing a location for a niche, coupled with a desire for visibility within the house. This contrasts with Deir el-Medina, a state-planned workman's village, where the options for placement were much more limited due to the long, narrow house profile and the agglutinated nature of the settlement. While balance was probably considered, it was likely more difficult to achieve within the overall space restrictions. The presence of niches at these distinctly different sites, therefore, seems to suggest that the reason for their inclusion goes beyond an architectural connection, which is further supported by the observation that when a niche is used to balance another niche, it negates architectural balance as a purpose for their inclusion, becoming a circular argument. As a result, an Emic approach to the investigation is needed. The cultic interpretation of niches relates directly to private religious practices. Domestic or private religion can be defined as any religious act that takes place within a domestic context, involving the veneration or pacification of supernatural entities by means of ritual practices. It is performative in nature, consisting of a thing done, not simply a thing said or a thing possessed. Additionally, while Egyptologists make the Etic distinction between domestic, funerary, and state religion, this is not necessarily reflective of the Egyptian culture. From an Emic perspective, a distinct demarcation between transactional religious rituals in temples, tombs, and households did not exist. The calendar of lucky and unlucky days highlights the permeability between the three spheres when it says, make an invocation offering to the ox spirits in your house, make an offering to the gods, and they will accept them on this day, calling for a parrot heru, a funerary offering, and a abit, a temple offering to the gods, to be given within the pair, the household. Further evidence of this overlap is seen with the false door features that appear in tomb and temple architecture, closely matching the niche design. So here, we can see the similarity between the niche and the false door in the tomb at Amenemopa. Likewise, we can see the parallel with the double false door in the throne room of the Medina Habu temple palace. An important aspect of Egyptian religion was its transactional nature, essentially involving a quid pro quo between the individual performing the ritual and the entity to whom it was being directed. The Hubal clearly illustrates this in lines 3 and 4, which state, it is for the Akh interceding for the living that one makes invocation offerings. Further, the practices performed depended only on the ritual, not the context in which they took place. The rituals attest in the mortuary or temple environment but also take place within the house. And, like all religious pursuits, the ultimate goal of private religion was to maintain and preserve ma'at, both in the household and the overall cosmos. In the domestic environment, the niche became the main locale for cultic activity, which involved the veneration of ancestors using mortuary rituals. The use of these rituals is supported by depictions of the deceased before an offering table, appearing on niches and associated cultic material such as this stela, which are the same as those found in tombs. The focus of the ritual revolved around maintaining a positive relationship between the family and the ancestors. However, the niche also took on a secondary role. Because Egypt conforms to the patrimonial household model, it would have been necessary to legitimize a living individual's social position based on his or her lineage. This would be achieved by a display of one's ancestors, especially via niches in the main reception room, which would have received a regular flow of visitors due to its multifunctionality as part of a hybrid household. In analyzing the rituals that would have been performed in association with the niche, the transformational element was essential, differentiating the deceased from the living and transforming the deceased into a new being, an Akh. This would then allow the deceased to participate in the solar circuit, communicate with the dead, and receive offerings. This then sets up the quid pro quo, where the deceased becomes reliant on the surviving relatives to perform cultic acts for their continual renewal, and their relatives continually engage in these acts to keep their ancestors pacified and willing to intercede favorably on their behalf. As a result, this required repetition caused religion to permeate domestic life. Taking a closer look at the relevant mortuary rituals, Pyramid Text Spell 246 reads, "You all shall arise from the Akhet-horizon, from the place which you all have been occupied therein," which clearly delineates that the deceased becomes occupied in the Akhet-horizon. PT 585a continues to explain the process, stating, "It is through you, Osiris, in your name, as the Akhet which re-emerges from therein, that Horus had been occupied." This is then expanded upon in the New Kingdom opening of the mouth text, which explains, "Your beauty belongs to you, personal name. It is when your father, Osiris, placed you within his arms, in his name, as the Akhet which Re encircles within it, that you had been occupied." Basically, the deceased, identified as Horus, becomes occupied or transformed by being embraced by Osiris, wherein Horus is the Akh and Osiris is the Akhet. Through his analysis of these Akh rituals, Eberhard Otto clearly establishes that the Akh statue is to be stored in the Akhet shrine, with the deceased becoming occupied as a result of being in the Akhet-horizon. Taking Otto's interpretation a bit further, Florence Friedman identifies the Akh-Eker image in the form of a bust, statue, or stela as the Akh spirit, which is held within a shrine called an Akhet. She then correlates this with the pun in the opening of the mouth text, relating to Horus and Osiris respectively. She explains that the deceased becomes occupied when the Akh-Eker image is placed into the Akhet shrine, the representation of the Akhet-horizon. In houses, the niche shrine functions as a receptacle for the Akh-Eker image and can thus be identified as the Akhet-horizon. Building upon Friedman's analysis, the purpose and meaning of niches can be more fully understood. In my evaluation of the coloration and built environment, niches actually become the embodiment of Akhet-horizons, effectively forming the B configuration when the image is included, with the lintel representing the sky and the threshold representing the earth, creating a microcosm within the macrocosm. Therefore, it is through the performative action of placing the cult image into the niche, accompanied by recitations, that the niche, conceptualized as a Jew sign, becomes the Akhet-horizon, and the deceased becomes occupied. This would have been followed by the regular presentation of offerings to keep the deceased pacified, with the entire ritual process likely repeated at feasts to the dead, reinstalling the deceased as an Akh spirit. Ultimately, this whole ritual process guarantees continued participation in the solar circuit, which is the ultimate goal of mortuary literature, with the niche creating the environment for the deceased to become occupied and serving as a shrine to house the Akh spirit. Based on this discussion and building upon a number of studies by Valerie Angenot, niche shrines and houses can take on two meanings in the same way the term Akhet can have a range of semantic meanings. Basically, the Akhet is a liminal, transitory space that connects between the perceptible and imperceptible and is both the birth and resting place of divinity. From a semiotic perspective, a niche can be identified as an Akhet shrine that houses the Akh spirit in a literal sense, the signifier, and it acts as the icon for the Akhet-horizon in a figurative sense, the signified, creating a visual metaphor. The niche's metaphoric identification as an Akhet-horizon comes about through its iconographic components being substituted into the aforementioned BAB configuration. This identification works because it utilizes a reception phenomenon called gestalt, which allows for the mind to recreate a familiar form by organizing the observed space as a whole rather than as a sum of its parts. While not obvious for the modern observer, it would have been easily recognized through the period eye of the ancient Egyptians. It's also important to note that while a great deal of change in regard to state religion occurred during the Amarna period, this had little effect on domestic religion, as research by Stevens has demonstrated. A large number of divinities beyond the Aten, as well as the royal family and private ancestors, were worshipped by the people of every social standing, demonstrating the flexibility between the official doctrine and the private practices. In conclusion, by combining the Etic and Emic perspectives, a holistic understanding of niches in New Kingdom settlements emerges, with the evidence indicating a cultic function, wherein the niche becomes a microcosm reflective of the macrocosm of the solar circuit, representing the Akhet-horizon and functioning as the Akhet shrine, the proper receptacle to house images of the Akh spirit. As such, niches are an essential component of the performative ritual to occupy the deceased to guarantee their successful transition into the hereafter and ensure they act beneficially towards their thriving relatives through the regular presentation of offerings. Furthermore, niches contributed to the institutionalization of inequality by exhibiting the lineage of the living to the visitors of the house in a heavily trafficked room, a form of conspicuous consumption, while also strengthening social relations, with the concept of architectural balance only playing a tangential role. Ultimately, the proposed ritual use of niches attests to the significance of private religion, especially ancestor veneration, in the daily lives of the ancient Egyptians. Thank you for your time. I'll take any and all questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tritsch. We have a question from Julia. I don't know if you can read it for us, Mr. Tritsch, or I can.
I don't see it. Is in the chat?
It's under the questions pod.
In the
I can read it.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Julia Trosh, she says, thanks, Michael, for your interesting talk. Friedman also argued 1985, pages 86 to 91, which he cited, that it was the Akh that received offerings for the Ka of the Akh, or the Ka of the Akh. And so I wonder if this could also indicate the utility of these spaces for feasting or food offerings. It makes me think about the niches on false doors, but I don't know if this comparison is relevant here.
Yeah, I mean, these spaces were definitely, almost certainly used for feasting. This is in the main room of the house. Most of these rooms have benches and probably other portable furniture that don't survive anymore. So yeah, that's a thing that Anna Stevens has suggested in her book on private religion, is that the main reception of the houses were used as places for like communal feasting and eating and stuff. So the idea that they would be offering like food and stuff to the deceased relatives, the ancestors in these shrines, I think is perfectly reasonable. And I agree with you completely there. In terms of your question about the false doors, I think there is a pretty clear connection. There's pretty solid debate over what these are used, what they are used for. Osman in his book, like Life and Death and Salvation in Ancient Egypt, identifies false doors as representations of an Akhet, like kind of following what I'm saying in my talk. So it just depends on how we understand false doors as being either a representation of a shrine for the deceased, or like a representation of like the double doors of heaven, which is usually understood as being a an Akhet symbolism. So I think either could work here. Unfortunately, it's just really hard to tell based on the current evidence that we have. But thanks for your question.
Okay. Another question is asking, is there any influence from Amarna to the Deir Medina context with regard to private cult?
Oh, I see the questions out. Yeah, so thank you for that question. Okay, so I think it's hard to like track, A leads to B, because that's just really hard. There's definitely clear overlap in practices. it's impossible to say if Amarna directly influenced Deir el-Medina. The workmen's village in Amarna has different evidence of private religion. They don't have niches in their houses in the workmen's village, not in the main city. So there isn't like a clear influence of the workmen from Amarna to the workmen of Deir el-Medina. They're probably two different populations with different practices. But I think in terms of just the general cultural beliefs about ancestors in the New Kingdom, there's some pretty common ideas that were definitely just throughout at least the sites that we have in Egypt at Amarna and at Deir el-Medina for sure.
Okay, Mustafa Zohdi asks, is there a connection between the placement of niches used for religious purposes to their orientation inside houses? Similarly, to how sacred rooms are placed inside temples?
Okay, thanks for the question. So there isn't clear like purposeful placement. I mean, they want to put it in highly visible places, but again, these are houses, so they can't lay it out like say a temple would. They're restricted by local consideration of space. So like for instance, at Amarna, in the houses, they tend to be located in these big reception rooms, like the central room, or sometimes the transverse hall, which is a hallway that you go into before you enter the main central room. So they're clearly wanting them to be visible and to be easily seen by people entering the room. At Deir el-Medina, these houses are really, really small and they're long and narrow and packed together really tightly. And most houses connect at least one of their walls to another house. So they're just trying to get these structures into the house, in my view. So there isn't as much purposeful placement. When they can, they try to put them in places that look aesthetically pleasing. But that's not always possible, just based on space restrictions. So I think there's an overlap between that and temple architecture. It's just in domestic architecture, there's more freedom, and space plays a much bigger role than you would have in like a large state temple, for instance.
Okay, one last question. How do you interpret false doors and coffin decoration in terms of your presentation?
So it depends what coffins we're talking about. So I'm assuming you're referencing like the big false doors on coffins and like Middle Kingdom, like the square middle or rectangular Middle Kingdom box coffin things. I can't quite tie those false doors to like my presentation just because it's a bit earlier. And there's been a lot of scholarship on that. But in terms of like say New Kingdom coffins, I'm not aware that false doors do occur on New Kingdom coffins. But if they do, I would love to see some pictures if you could send them to me. But thanks for your comment and questions. It's definitely something I should look into a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tritsch. We'll transition to the next speaker.
Thank you.